I always thought my life with Emily was the kind of quiet perfection people envied. We'd been married for 12 years, living in a modest house on the edge of town with a wraparound porch and a garden she tended with meticulous care. She had this way about her, soft-spoken, with eyes that crinkled when she laughed, and hands that fluttered like birds when she got excited telling a story. I worked long hours at the lumber mill, the kind of job that left sawdust in my hair and calluses on my palms, but it paid the bills and kept us comfortable. Emily taught piano lessons from home, her fingers dancing across the keys in a way that made our little world feel alive. We didn't have children, never could, despite the years of trying, but we had each other and that seemed enough. It started with small things I didn't notice at first. She'd linger after her lessons with certain students, chatting longer than usual. I'd come home, boots heavy with the day's labor, and find her sitting at the kitchen table, staring out the window with a faint smile I couldn't place. "Just thinking," she'd say when I asked, brushing it off with a wave of her hand. I trusted her. Why wouldn't I? She was my Emily, my wife, my anchor, the woman who'd cried in my arms when we got the news about her infertility, the one who'd promised me forever under a sky full of stars on our wedding night. But then there was Daniel. He was one of her newer students, a guy in his late 30s with a sharp jawline and a laugh that carried through the walls. I met him once or twice, tall, broad-shouldered, the kind of man who looked like he belonged in a magazine, not our dusty little town. He'd started taking lessons 6 months ago, showing up every Tuesday and Thursday in a sleek black car that seemed out of place parked beside our weathered pickup. Emily said he was a beginner, eager to learn, and I didn't think much of it. She'd had plenty of students over the years, kids, retirees, even a few oddballs. Daniel was just another name on her schedule. Until he wasn't. I started noticing how she'd hum to herself after his lessons, a tune I didn't recognize. Her cheeks flushed in a way I hadn't seen in years. She'd bought new clothes, nothing extravagant, just a few dresses that hugged her frame a little closer than the loose sweaters she usually wore. "I just felt like a change," she told me when I raised an eyebrow. Her voice light but her eyes darting away. I didn't push it. Maybe I should have. Maybe I should have seen the way the air shifted when Daniel's name came up, how her lips twitched like she was holding something back. One Thursday, I came home early. The mill had shut down for maintenance, and I figured I'd surprise her with takeout from the diner she loved. The house was quiet when I pulled up, except for the faint sound of the piano drifting through the open window. I smiled to myself. Emily must have been in the middle of a lesson. I grabbed the paper bag of burgers and fries and stepped inside, expecting to see her at the bench, Daniel fumbling through scales like she'd described. But the living room was empty. The piano sat silent, a single sheet of music resting on the stand. Upstairs, I heard a laugh, hers, unmistakable, followed by a deeper voice I knew too well. My stomach twisted. I set the bag down and climbed the stairs, each step heavier than the last, my heart thudding in my chest like a warning I couldn't ignore. The hallway stretched out before me like a tunnel, the wooden floor creaking under my weight as I moved toward our bedroom. The door was cracked open, just enough for the sound to spill out. Emily's laughter again, softer this time, laced with something I couldn't name. My hand hovered over the knob, trembling, as Daniel's voice murmured something low and indistinct. I didn't want to believe it. Not my Emily. Not after everything we'd built together. The late nights talking about dreams we'd never chase. The mornings when she'd slip her hand into mine over coffee. The quiet promises we'd made to weather anything life threw at us. I pushed the door open slowly, and the sight hit me like a punch to the gut. They didn't notice me at first. Emily was sitting on the edge of our bed. Our bed. Her hair loose and spilling over her shoulders, her dress unbuttoned just enough to show the curve of her collarbone. Daniel stood in front of her, his shirt untucked, his hands resting on her knees as he leaned in close, whispering something that made her smile in a way she hadn't smiled at me in years. It wasn't frantic or rushed. It was intimate, familiar, like they'd done this before. My throat tightened, and I felt the air leave my lungs in a sharp, silent gasp. Then she saw me. Her eyes widened, and the color drained from her face. "James?" she breathed, scrambling to her feet, tugging her dress closed as if that could erase what I'd just witnessed. Daniel turned, his expression shifting from surprise to something harder, almost defiant. "This isn't what it looks like," Emily said, her voice shaking, but the words sounded hollow, rehearsed. I stood there, rooted to the spot, my fists clenched so tight my nails dug into my palms. "Isn't it?" I managed, my voice low and rough, barely recognizable to myself. She took a step toward me, her hands outstretched like she could pull me back into the lie we'd been living. "I swear, James, it's not. I didn't mean for this to happen." Daniel stayed silent, watching us like a predator sizing up a threat. I couldn't look at him. All I could see was her, the woman I'd loved for half my life, standing there with guilt written across her face, her lips still flushed from whatever they'd been doing before I walked in. "How long?" I asked, the question cutting through the air like a blade. She hesitated, and that pause told me everything. "Months," she whispered finally, her eyes dropping to the floor. "Months." The word echoed in my skull, each syllable a hammer against the life I thought I knew. Months of her smiling at me over dinner, kissing me goodnight, telling me she loved me while she was slipping away to him. I wanted to scream, to tear the room apart, to demand why I hadn't been enough. But all I could do was stare at her, at the stranger wearing my wife's face. "Get out," I said, my voice steady despite the storm raging inside me. Daniel moved first, brushing past me without a word, his shoulder grazing mine like a challenge. Emily lingered, tears welling in her eyes. "James, please let me explain." "Out," I repeated, louder this time, pointing at the door. She flinched, then grabbed her shoes and fled, leaving me alone in the wreckage of our marriage. I sank onto the bed, the sheets still warm from where they'd been, and buried my face in my hands, trying to breathe through the suffocating weight of betrayal. The days after that blurred into a haze of silence and rage. Emily didn't come back. Not that night, not the next. I didn't call her, didn't text, didn't beg her to explain. What was there to say? I'd seen it with my own eyes, felt it in the way the house seemed to echo with her absence. The piano sat untouched, a layer of dust settling over the keys she'd once played so beautifully. I couldn't bring myself to sit there, to touch what she'd shared with him. Instead, I threw myself into work, hauling logs and running the saws until my muscles ached and my mind went numb. But it didn't help. Every quiet moment brought her back, her laugh, her touch, the lies she'd woven so effortlessly. I found out where she'd gone through a friend at the diner. "Saw her with that Daniel guy," he'd said casually over a beer, not realizing he was twisting the knife deeper. "They've been at his place across town. Looked cozy." Cozy. The word burned in my chest, conjuring images I couldn't shake. Her curled up on his couch, her head on his shoulder, her life moving forward while mine crumbled. I drove by his house once, late at night, just to see. Her car was parked in the driveway, the lights glowing through the curtains. I sat there for an hour, gripping the steering wheel, fighting the urge to storm in and drag her out. But I didn't. Not yet. Instead, I started digging. I wasn't some tech genius, but I knew enough to check her email. She'd left her laptop behind, still logged in. What I found made my stomach churn. Messages between them, dozens of them, stretching back nearly a year. "Can't wait to see you," she'd written in one, sent while I was at work. "You make me feel alive," in another. There were photos, too. Nothing explicit, but intimate enough to cut deeper than any blade. Her smiling at him in a park, his arm around her waist, their faces pressed close in a selfie. Each one was a betrayal, a piece of her I'd never known she'd given away. I didn't sleep that night. I sat at the kitchen table with a bottle of whiskey, the laptop glowing in front of me, rereading every word until they blurred into a single, searing truth. She'd chosen him. Not just once, but over and over, while I'd been blind, trusting, building a life she'd already abandoned. The anger grew, sharp and cold, coiling around my heart like wire. I wasn't going to let it end like this. Not with her walking away unscathed. Not with him taking what was mine. I needed her to feel what I felt, to understand the depth of the hole she'd left in me. The plan came slowly, piecing itself together in the dark. It wasn't enough to confront her, to yell or plead or walk away. No, this had to be bigger, crueler, something that would linger in her mind long after I was gone from her life. I started small, gathering what I knew about Daniel. He owned a construction business, had a reputation around town as a charmer with money to burn. I remembered a guy at the mill mentioning Daniel's temper, how he'd nearly come to blows over a botched job. There was a crack there, a weakness I could exploit. And Emily. She'd always cared what people thought of her. Always wanted to be seen as good, kind, perfect. I'd take that from her, strip it away until she couldn't look in the mirror without seeing the truth. This wasn't just revenge. It was justice. The first step was understanding who I was dealing with. Daniel wasn't just some random guy who'd stumbled into my wife's life. He was calculated, deliberate. I spent days piecing together his world, driving by his office, a squat brick building on the edge of town with a sign that read, Harrington Construction. I watched him come and go, always in that black car, always with a swagger that made my blood boil. I talked to people casually over coffee or at the bar, picking up scraps of information. He'd moved here 3 years ago, bought up land, built a name for himself. Thinks he's hot stuff, one guy said, rolling his eyes. Got a temper, though. Fired a whole crew once over a late delivery. Emily, though, was harder to unravel. She'd covered her tracks well, at least until I found the emails. I started noticing patterns. Times she'd claimed to be running errands or meeting friends that lined up with her messages to him. She'd built a whole secret life, and I'd been too busy, too trusting to see it. The more I learned, the angrier I got. Not just at her, but at myself. How had I missed it? The late nights she'd spent preparing lessons. The weekends she'd gone to workshops out of town. Lies, all of them, and I'd swallowed every one. I decided to hit them where it hurt most. Their pride. Daniel's business relied on his reputation. Clients liked him because he was smooth, reliable, the guy who got things done. Emily cared about her image, too. Her students' parents saw her as wholesome, dependable, the kind of woman you trusted with your kids. I tear that down brick by brick. I started with something small but sharp. I printed out a few of their emails, not the worst ones, just enough to hint at what was going on, and mailed them anonymously to a couple of her students' parents. No note, no explanation, just the words, "Thought you should know," scrawled on the envelope. The fallout came fast. 2 families pulled their kids from her lessons within a week, citing personal reasons. I heard about it through the grapevine. Emily had called one of the mothers, flustered, trying to explain it away as a misunderstanding. But the whispers had started, and in a town like ours, whispers spread like wildfire. I didn't feel joy watching it unfold. Not exactly. Just a grim satisfaction, a sense that the scales were starting to tip. She'd feel the weight of her choices soon enough. Meanwhile, I kept tabs on Daniel. I found out he was bidding on a big project, a new community center the town council was pushing. It was his chance to cement his status, bring in real money. I couldn't sabotage the bid directly, I wasn't that connected, but I could plant seeds. I knew a guy who knew a guy on the council, and over beers one night, I let slip that Daniel's business might not be as solid as it seemed. Heard he's been distracted lately? I said, keeping it vague. Personal stuff. My buddy raised an eyebrow but didn't press. I knew he'd pass it along. That was enough for now. A crack in the foundation waiting to widen. Emily showed up at the house a week later, unannounced. I was in the garage, tinkering with an old lawnmower I hadn't touched in years, when I heard her car pull into the driveway. My hands froze on the wrench, the sound of her engine cutting through the haze of my thoughts. She stepped out, looking smaller than I remembered, her hair pulled back tight, her eyes shadowed with exhaustion. "James," she said, her voice tentative as she stood at the edge of the garage, clutching her purse like a shield. "Can we talk?" I didn't answer right away. I wiped my hands on a rag, slow and deliberate, letting the silence stretch between us. She shifted her weight, glancing at the house like she was seeing it for the first time. "I know you're angry," she started, stepping closer. "I don't blame you. What I did, it was wrong. I was selfish, stupid. But I miss you. I miss us. Her voice cracked, and tears welled in her eyes. But all I could see was her on that bed, Daniel's hands on her, the life she'd chosen over me. Miss us, I echoed, tossing the rag onto the workbench. You didn't miss us when you were with him, when you were lying to my face every day. She flinched, but I kept going, the words spilling out like venom. You think you can just walk back in here, cry a little, and make it all go away? You broke everything, Emily. Everything. She opened her mouth to argue, but I cut her off. Why are you even here? Things not working out with your boyfriend. Her face crumpled, and she looked away. It's not like that, she said softly. I ended it with him. I told him it was a mistake. I want to come home, James. I want to fix this. I laughed. A harsh, bitter sound that echoed off the garage walls. Fix this? You don't get to fix this. You don't get to decide when it's over. She stared at me, her tears falling freely now, but I felt nothing. No pity, no longing. Just a cold, steady resolve. She left after that, her pleas fading into the hum of her car as she drove away. I didn't watch her go. Instead, I turned back to the lawnmower, my mind already shifting to the next move. She thought she could waltz back into my life, play the remorseful wife, but I wasn't done. Not even close. The emails to her students' parents were just the beginning. Now I'd turn up the heat. Daniel's bid on the community center was still in play, and I had one more card to pull. I'd make sure they both paid, not just for what they'd done, but for thinking they could outrun the consequences. After Emily's visit, the house felt emptier than ever, like a shell hollowed out by her absence. I didn't miss her. Not the way I thought I would. What I missed was the illusion, the version of her I'd loved before the truth ripped it apart. Now, every corner of our home was tainted, every memory suspect. I stopped sleeping in our bed, opting instead for the lumpy couch in the living room, the TV flickering late into the night to drown out the silence. But sleep didn't matter. What mattered was the plan, the slow, deliberate unraveling of their lives I'd set in motion. Daniel's community center bid was my next target. I'd already planted doubts with my buddy who knew someone on the council, but that was too subtle, too slow. I needed something concrete, something that would stick. I remembered a guy from the mill, Pete, who'd worked for Daniel a couple of years back. Over a greasy lunch at the diner, I got him talking. Yeah, he's a piece of work, Pete said, wiping ketchup off his chin. Cut corners on a job once, used cheap materials, billed the client full price. Got away with it, too. Guy's slicker than an eel. I leaned in, keeping my tone casual. Ever hear anything else? Something that might come back to bite him? Pete shrugged, but his eyes narrowed like he was thinking. Maybe. Heard he stiffed some suppliers, too. Cash flow problems. Nothing solid, though. That was enough. Cash flow problems could be a rumor or a fact. Either way, I'd make it real. I spent a night digging through public records online, cross-referencing Daniel's business with anything I could find. There wasn't much, but I stumbled on a lien filed against Harrington Construction 2 years ago. Unpaid invoices from a lumber supplier upstate. It had been settled, but the paper trail was there, a thread I could pull. I printed it out, made copies, and started crafting a letter. Not to the council directly, that'd be too obvious, but to a local contractor I knew gossiped like a tabloid. Thought you might want to see this, I wrote, keeping it anonymous. Harrington's not as solid as he looks. I dropped it in the mail and waited. Meanwhile, Emily's world was starting to crack. I'd heard from a neighbor that 2 more students had quit her lessons, and the whispers were growing louder. People are saying she's been distracted. The neighbor told me, her voice dripping with pity I didn't want. I nodded, keeping my face neutral, but inside, I felt that same cold satisfaction. She'd built her life on being the sweet, reliable piano teacher, and now that was slipping through her fingers. I wondered if she knew it was me, if she suspected the emails, the quiet sabotage. Part of me hoped she did. Part of me wanted her to feel my hand in it, even if she couldn't prove it. I saw her car outside Daniel's place again a few nights later, despite her claim she'd ended it. The lie didn't surprise me, but it fueled the fire. Whatever remorse she'd shown at the garage was just another performance, a plea to ease her guilt. I sat in my truck a block away, watching the lights flicker in his windows, imagining her laughing with him, pretending I didn't exist. That's when I decided it wasn't enough to hurt them separately. I needed them to turn on each other, to feel the betrayal I'd felt, to watch their precious little affair collapse under its own weight. The lien letter was in play, but I had more to do. Something personal, something crueler. I drove home with a new idea taking shape, one that would cut deeper than anything I'd done so far. The idea crystallized over a sleepless night, fueled by whiskey and the hum of the TV. If Emily and Daniel thought they could rebuild after what they'd done, I'd make sure their foundation was rotten before they even started. I'd use their own words, their own secrets, to drive a wedge between them. The emails I'd found on her laptop were a goldmine. Hundreds of messages stretching back a year, full of promises, confessions, moments they'd stolen from me. I'd already used some to rattle her students' parents, but now I'd turn them inward, let them fester between the two of them. I started by picking the worst ones, not the sweet nothings, but the raw, unguarded exchanges that showed their flaws. In one, Emily had written, "Sometimes I wish I'd met you first. James is so predictable. Safe. Predictable. Safe." The words stung, even now, but they'd sting Daniel more when he saw what came later. In another message, sent after a fight with him, she typed, "You're too controlling sometimes. I need space, not another husband." I smirked at that, let him chew on her doubts. From his side, there were gems, too. "You're more fun than my ex, but you're clingy in the same way." Clingy. I could almost picture her face when she read that. I printed a dozen of these, carefully curated to highlight every crack in their perfect little romance. Then I added a twist, handwritten notes in the margins, mimicking their styles. Next to Emily's predictable comment, I scrawled in Daniel's blocky print, "Guess I'm the upgrade, huh?" Beside his clingy jab, I wrote in her loopy cursive, "Maybe I should have stayed with James. It wasn't perfect, but it didn't need to be." Doubt didn't require proof, it just needed a spark. I stuffed the pages into an envelope, addressed it to Daniel's office, and mailed it with no return address. Let him open it, let him stew, let him wonder if she'd sent it herself. Emily got her own package a day later, different messages, same game. I picked ones where Daniel bragged about his conquests, including her. "She's hooked, can't get enough of me," he'd written to a friend early on, before they'd gotten serious. I added my own note in his handwriting, "Still true, M." I dropped it in her mailbox at his place under the cover of night, my pulse pounding as I slipped away. It was petty, childish even, but it felt good, better than I'd expected. I wanted them paranoid, sniping at each other, unraveling the trust they thought they'd built. The fallout came quicker than I'd hoped. I heard through the rumor mill that Daniel had lost the community center bid. Word was, the council went with a smaller firm after concerns about his finances surfaced. The lien letter had done its job, amplified by whispers I'd fed into the town's gossip network. Emily's lessons were down to a handful of students now, her reputation fraying at the edges. I pictured them holed up in his house, licking their wounds, maybe even blaming each other. The thought kept me warm at night, a flicker of triumph in the dark. But I wasn't done. The emails were just the beginning. I had one last move, something bigger, something they'd never see coming. The next phase required patience, something I'd never been good at until now. Revenge had a way of teaching you to wait, to let the pieces fall into place. I'd chipped away at their lives, Daniel's business faltering, Emily's reputation crumbling, but it still wasn't enough. I wanted them to feel trapped, cornered, the way I'd felt standing in that bedroom doorway. So I started watching them closer, learning their routines. Daniel left for work at 8 most mornings, his car gleaming in the dawn light. Emily stayed behind, sometimes stepping onto his porch with a mug, her face drawn and tired. They weren't happy. I could see it in the way they moved, the tension in their shoulders when they were together. My little email stunt had worked better than I'd dared hope. I decided to escalate. Daniel's construction business was already on shaky ground, but I could push it over the edge. I remembered Pete mentioning those unpaid suppliers, and while the lien I'd found was old, it gave me an idea. I tracked down the company, some outfit called Northwood Lumber, and called them from a burner phone I'd picked up at a gas station. "Hey, I'm with Harrington Construction," I lied, thickening my voice to sound gruff. "We've got some outstanding invoices from last year trying to clear the books. Can you send over what we owe?" The guy on the other end didn't hesitate, rattling off an email address I gave him. Something generic I'd set up online. Sure enough, a PDF landed in my inbox an hour later. 3 unpaid bills totaling 15 grand, marked overdue, from a job Daniel had done months ago. I didn't stop there. I called 2 more suppliers, spinning the same story, and got similar results, smaller amounts but enough to pile on. I forged a letterhead from Harrington Construction, using a template I found online, and sent the invoices back to the suppliers with a note. Payment delayed due to cash flow issues. Contact Daniel Harrington directly. I included his personal cell number, which I dug out of Emily's emails. Within days, I imagined his phone buzzing with angry calls, his temper flaring as he scrambled to explain. It wouldn't bankrupt him. Not yet. But it'd keep him distracted, off balance, while I worked on Emily. Her turn came next. She'd always been proud of her piano, a baby grand her parents had given us as a wedding gift. It sat in our living room still, a relic of better days. I'd avoided it for weeks, but now I saw it for what it could be. A weapon. I called a guy I knew who dealt in used instruments, told him I had a piano to sell. He came by, appraised it at $2,000, and hauled it away in his truck the next day. I didn't care about the money. I cared about what it'd do to her when she found out. I took a photo of the empty space where it had been, wrote "Gone," like us on the back, and mailed it to Daniel's address with her name on the envelope. Let her see it. Let her feel the loss. I sat back that night, the house quieter without the piano's looming presence, and wondered how long it'd take her to crack. She'd loved that thing, cried when we'd had it tuned, laughed about teaching our imaginary kids on it someday. Now it was gone, and so was I, at least the version of me she'd known. The suppliers, the piano, the emails, it was all building to something, a storm I could feel gathering. I wasn't sure what the final blow would be, but I knew it'd be brutal, and I knew I'd savor every second of it. The storm broke a week later, and it was messier than I'd planned. I was at the mill, hauling logs under a gray sky, when my phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. "You bastard," it read, followed by, "You sold it." I didn't need to guess who it was. Emily's fury practically burned through the screen. I didn't reply, just pocketed the phone and kept working, a grim smile tugging at my lips. She'd gotten the photo, then, good. Let her stew in it. Let her imagine that empty space where her precious piano had been. I wondered if she'd cried, if she'd screamed at Daniel about it, if he'd even cared. She showed up at the house that evening, banging on the door while I sat on the couch with a beer, debating whether to let her in. "James, open the damn door," she yelled, her voice raw and ragged. I waited a full minute, letting her pound away, before I got up and turned the lock. She stormed inside, her face streaked with tears, her hair wild like she'd been pulling at it. "How could you?" she demanded, shoving the photo at me like it was evidence in a trial. "That was mine, ours. You had no right." I stared at her, calm and cold, and said, "I had every right. You walked out. You don't get to keep pieces of me." She froze, her mouth open, then sank into a chair, burying her face in her hands. "I didn't mean for it to get this bad," she mumbled through her fingers. I needed something, James. I was drowning here, and you didn't see it." I almost laughed at that. Drowning? I'd been the one working myself raw to keep us afloat, while she'd been playing house with Daniel. "You needed him," I said flatly, "and now you've got him. So why are you here?" She looked up, eyes pleading. "I told you I ended it. I want to come back. I'll do anything." I didn't believe her, not for a second. She wasn't here for me. She was here because her perfect escape was falling apart. Daniel's business was bleeding, her students were gone, And now her piano, the last tie to the life she'd thrown away, was out of reach. Anything? I repeated, leaning forward. Then tell me everything. Every time you lied. Every place you went with him. Every word you said behind my back. She hesitated, and that was all I needed. Get out, I said again, pointing at the door. She left without another word. Her shoulders slumped, and I knew I'd won that round. But Daniel wasn't done fighting. I got a call the next day from a number I didn't recognize. I realized later. You think you're clever, huh? He snarled when I picked up. Messing with my business, sending your little notes? You're pathetic. I stayed silent, letting him rant, his voice rising with every word. Stay out of my life, or I'll make you regret it. He hung up before I could respond, but his threat only sharpened my resolve. He thought he could scare me off? He didn't know who he was dealing with, not yet. Daniel's call lit a fuse I didn't know I had. Pathetic, he'd said. I'd show him pathetic. I'd show them both. The suppliers were already hounding him, thanks to my forged letters, and Emily was cracking under the weight of her losses. But I needed something bigger. Something that'd leave them both reeling. Something they couldn't ignore or explain away. I spent that night pacing the house, the empty living room mocking me with its silence, until an idea hit me so hard I stopped cold. Their affair had started in secret, thrived in the shadows. Why not drag it into the light, where everyone could see? The town had a bulletin board downtown, a weathered cork slab where people posted flyers for lost dogs or yard sales. It was old-fashioned, but it got eyes, hundreds of them, every day. I went back to the emails, picking the juiciest ones. Emily's gushing about how Daniel lit up her world, his bragging about stealing her away. I printed them out, blew them up to poster size at a copy shop 2 towns over, and added photos I'd pulled from her laptop. The two of them grinning in that park, his arm around her, her looking at him like he was the sun. I didn't sign my name, just tacked them up in the dead of night. A dozen sheets plastered across the board, flapping in the breeze for the morning crowd to find. By noon, the town was buzzing. I stayed away, kept my head down at the mill, but I heard it all through the guys, how people had stopped and stared, whispering behind their hands, how some had taken pictures to spread online. Emily's name was mud now, her good girl image shredded in public. Daniel's, too. He wasn't just the slick businessman anymore. He was the guy who'd wrecked a marriage. I drove by that evening, saw the posters still up, some torn at the edges but legible, and felt a rush of dark triumph. Let them face that. Let them explain it. Daniel came for me the next day. I was in the driveway, unloading groceries, when his car screeched to a stop. He stormed out, face red, fists clenched, and got right up in my grill. "You think this is funny?" he shouted, shoving me hard enough to make me stumble. "You're ruining everything." I shoved back, years of hauling lumber giving me the edge, and he staggered. "You ruined it," I growled. "You and her. This is just the bill coming due." He swung at me, a wild punch I ducked, and I tackled him to the ground, pinning him there until he stopped thrashing. "Stay away from me," I warned, letting him up. He glared, spat on the ground, and drove off, but I knew I'd rattled him. Emily called that night, sobbing into the phone. "Why are you doing this, James? Everyone's talking. I can't even go outside." I listened, cold and still, then said, "You did this. You chose him. Live with it." I hung up, and for the first time in weeks, I slept, deep and dreamless, the weight of their misery a blanket I didn't mind carrying. But I wasn't finished. The posters were a blow, but the final strike was still coming, and it'd be the cruelest yet. The posters had done their damage, but I wasn't satisfied. Emily's tears over the phone, Daniel's fists in my driveway. They were cracks, not collapses. I wanted them broken, not just bruised. The town was still buzzing, the gossip a living thing that followed them everywhere. But it'd fade eventually. People would move on, and they'd slink away to lick their wounds, maybe even rebuild. I couldn't let that happen. I needed something permanent, something that'd haunt them long after the whispers died down. That's when I remembered the house, our house, the one Emily and I had bought together, the one she'd abandoned for him. It wasn't just a building. It was a symbol. Every brick laid with the promise of a life we'd planned. Every room filled with memories she'd tainted. She didn't deserve it, not even the ghost of it. I'd sell it, sure, but not before I made it a weapon. I started by gutting it, slowly, methodically, like a surgeon carving out a disease. I ripped up the hardwood floors we'd installed together, prying each plank loose with a crowbar, the splintered wood piling up in the yard. I tore down the curtains she'd sewn, shredded them into rags, and left them scattered across the living room. The walls came next, sledgehammer to the drywall, exposing the studs like bones, dust choking the air. I didn't stop there. The kitchen, where she'd hummed while cooking dinner, got the worst of it. I smashed the cabinets, yanked the sink from its moorings, let the pipes leak until the floor was a swamp. It wasn't mindless destruction. It was deliberate, a message written in wreckage. I took photos of every step, the chaos growing with each swing, and saved them. When I was done, the house was a shell, uninhabitable, unsellable, a ruin that mirrored what she'd left behind. I called a realtor the next day, told him to list it as is, dirt cheap. Fire sale, I said, and he didn't ask questions. Emily found out fast. She showed up while I was loading the last of my tools into the truck, her car skidding to a stop in the driveway. "What did you do?" she screamed, running toward the house, her voice breaking as she took in the gaping windows, the shattered porch. She spun on me, eyes wild. "This was ours, James. Our home." I leaned against the truck, arms crossed, and met her gaze. "It stopped being ours when you walked out. Now it's nothing, just like us." She sank to her knees in the muddy yard, sobbing, but I didn't move. I snapped one last photo of her there, crumpled and small, and drove away. The sale went through a week later. Some investor snatched it up for pennies, planning to flip it. I didn't care. The money wasn't the point. The point was her seeing it, knowing I'd taken it from her, knowing it'd never be hers again. I mailed her the photos, dozens of them, a gallery of destruction with that final shot of her in the yard on top. No note, just the images, letting them speak for me. Daniel could have her now, but he'd never give her back what I'd torn away. That was power, and I felt it settle into me, heavy and sure. Daniel didn't take the house thing lying down. I'd expected that. He wasn't the type to slink off quietly. He showed up at the mill 2 days after the sale, waiting by my truck as I clocked out, his face a mask of barely contained rage. "You're a coward," he spat, stepping close enough I could smell the coffee on his breath. "Hiding behind your little games, emails, posters, trashing your own house. You think that hurts me?" I didn't flinch, just stared him down, my hands loose at my sides. "It's not about you," I said. "It's about her. But you're feeling it, aren't you?" He lunged, faster than before, and this time I didn't dodge. His fist caught my jaw, a sharp crack that sent me reeling, but I came back swinging, years of hauling lumber behind every punch. We grappled in the dirt, grunting and cursing, until a couple of guys from the mill pulled us apart. "Enough!" one shouted, holding Daniel back as he strained against them, blood trickling from his lip. I wiped my own mouth, tasting copper, and smiled. A thin, bitter thing. "You're welcome to her," I said, spitting into the dust. "She's all yours now." He glared, but there was something hollow in his eyes, like he knew he'd lost more than he'd won. I didn't see him again after that, but I heard things. His business was circling the drain. Suppliers calling in debts, clients pulling out, the community center fiasco the final nail. The town didn't trust him anymore. Not after the posters, not after the rumors I'd fed. Emily was worse off. Living with him still, but barely leaving the house, her piano gone, her students a memory. I'd stripped her bare, piece by piece, and left her with nothing but him. A man who couldn't save her, who couldn't even save himself. But I wasn't done. The house was gone. Their reputations shredded. Their trust in each other poisoned by those forged notes. I had one last card. Something I'd been holding back. Something that'd twist the knife deeper than anything else. Came to me while I was sorting through the last of her things. Stuff she'd left behind, too sentimental to take, too painful for me to keep. Among the boxes was a small velvet pouch and inside her wedding ring. She'd stopped wearing it months ago, claimed it was uncomfortable. But here it was, tucked away like a secret. I turned it over in my hand, the gold catching the light, and knew exactly what to do. I melted it down that night using a torch I'd borrowed from the mill. The ring softened, then liquefied, a puddle of molten gold I poured into a crude mold. A tiny, jagged heart, rough and ugly. It wasn't art. It was a statement. I let it cool, then polished it just enough to shine. A mocking little trinket. I'd give it back to her, but not as a gift. As a reminder of what she'd thrown away, what she'd never get back. The final blow was coming, and it'd be personal, intimate. A wound she'd carry forever. The melted ring sat on my kitchen table for days, glinting under the fluorescent light. A warped little heart that mocked everything we'd been. I didn't rush it. Timing mattered. Emily and Daniel were already teetering, their lives a mess of my making, but this would be the push that sent them over. I imagined her face when she saw it, the recognition, the guilt, the realization that I'd turned her own promise into something broken and cruel. It wasn't enough to destroy their present. I wanted their past, too. Every memory she might have clung to, every hope she might have harbored. I tracked her down through a friend who'd seen her at the grocery store, pale and quiet, buying cheap canned goods like money was tight. She was still at Daniel's, holed up in that fancy house that probably felt more like a cage now. I waited until a night when his car wasn't in the driveway. Off on some desperate bid to save his business, I figured. I drove over, the ring in my pocket, and knocked on his door, my pulse steady despite the weight of what I was about to do. She answered, looking thinner, her eyes red-rimmed like she'd been crying. "James," she whispered, stepping back. "What are you doing here?" I didn't answer, just held out the little heart, letting it dangle from my fingers. She stared, confused at first. Then her breath hitched as she recognized the gold, the faint engraving of our initials still visible on one edge. What is that?" she stammered, her hand trembling as she reached for it, then pulled back. "Your ring," I said, my voice flat. "Thought you might want it back. Fixed it up for you." Her eyes filled with tears, and she shook her head, backing into the house. No, why would you?" I tossed it at her feet, the metal clinking against the hardwood. "Keep it," I said. "Something to remember me by." She crumpled then, sliding to the floor, clutching the ruined heart like it burned her. I didn't stay to watch. I turned and left, the sound of her sobs following me into the night. It should have felt good, that final twist, but it didn't. Not really. It felt done, like I'd emptied myself out, poured every ounce of pain into her and walked away lighter. I drove home, the truck's engine rumbling through the quiet, and sat in the dark, staring at the space where our life used to be. The house was gone, the ring was gone, and so was she, truly finally gone. Daniel's reaction came later, indirect but clear. A buddy at the bar told me he'd seen him drunk, ranting about that psycho ex to anyone who'd listen. His business all but dead, his charm worn thin. Emily hadn't left him. Not yet. But they were fraying, the tension between them a live wire ready to snap. I'd done that. I'd taken their affair, their betrayal, and turned it into a prison they couldn't escape. The ring was the lock, and I'd thrown away the key. Weeks passed, and the town settled into a new rhythm, the scandal fading into background noise. I moved into a small apartment near the mill, a bare-bones place with peeling paint and a view of the highway. It wasn't home, but it was mine, clean of her, free of the past. I kept working, kept living, the routine a lifeline that pulled me through the days. People stopped asking about Emily, stopped giving me those pitying looks, and I let myself believe I'd won. Not happiness, maybe, but survival. That was enough. Then I saw them, together but not together. I was grabbing coffee at the diner when they walked in, Daniel first, Emily trailing behind. He looked rough, unshaven, his shirt wrinkled, his eyes darting like he expected trouble. She was a shadow, her hair limp, her shoulders hunched, clutching a purse that sagged like it was empty. They didn't touch, didn't speak, just sat at a booth in silence, staring at their menus like strangers. I watched from the counter, unnoticed, and saw the little heart on a chain around her neck, the melted ring worn like a scar. She hadn't let it go. I paid my bill and left, but the image stuck with me. They weren't happy, weren't even pretending anymore. I'd done that too. The emails, the posters, the house, the ring. It had all piled up, a weight they couldn't shake. I heard later from Pete that Daniel's business had folded. His last crew walking out after he couldn't pay them. Emily wasn't teaching anymore, couldn't, with no piano and no students. They were stuck, tethered to each other by the wreckage I'd left behind, and I wondered if they hated each other as much as they hated me. I didn't gloat, didn't celebrate. I just kept going work, sleep, repeat. But sometimes, late at night, I'd think about that heart around her neck, the way it must have felt against her skin, cold and jagged. I'd think about Daniel's hollow eyes, his empire reduced to nothing, and I'd feel it. Not joy, not peace, but a quiet, steady burn. Justice, maybe, or closure. Whatever it was mine and they couldn't take it back. One last thing happened, a coda I didn't expect. A letter came to my new place, no return address, just her handwriting on the envelope. Inside was a single sheet, her words shaky. I'm sorry, James, for everything. I wear it every day. I won't forget. No plea, no explanation, just that. I read it once, then burned it in the sink, watching the paper curl and blacken until it was ash. I didn't need her sorry. I didn't need anything from her anymore. Spring came, and with it a kind of stillness I hadn't felt in years. The mill was steady, the apartment mine, the past a shadow that didn't touch me unless I let it. I'd see Daniel around sometimes. Driving a beat-up sedan now, his black car long gone, his head down like he didn't want to be seen. Emily I saw less, but when I did, she was alone. Walking the streets with that heart still around her neck, her eyes distant, her steps slow. They weren't together anymore, I heard. She'd moved out, rented a tiny place on the edge of town, scraping by on whatever she could find. He'd left for a while, then came back, living in a trailer park near the highway. Separate, broken, carrying the weight of what I'd done. I didn't follow them, didn't dig for details. I didn't need to, they were living it every day and that was enough. The house had been torn down, the lot cleared for something new, and I drove by once to see it. Just dirt and possibility, no trace of us left. The piano was gone. The ring was hers, the life we'd had erased. I'd taken everything she'd valued, everything she'd betrayed me for, and turned it to dust. Daniel, too, his pride, his business, his swagger, all ground down to nothing. People asked sometimes, over beers or at the mill, what happened between us. I'd shrug, say, she left, that's it, and let them fill in the blanks. They didn't need to know the rest, the slow, cruel dismantling, the way I'd made them pay. It was mine to carry, a story I'd written in silence, a revenge that didn't shout but sank deep. I wasn't proud, not exactly, but I wasn't ashamed either. It was what it was. One night, I sat on my balcony, the highway humming below, and thought about starting over. Not with someone new, not yet, but with myself. I'd survived her, survived them, and come out the other side. The anger was gone, burned out in the fire I'd set, and what was left was me scarred, sure, but whole. Emily had her heart, Daniel had his ruin, and I had this. A life they couldn't touch, a quiet they couldn't break. I lit a cigarette, watched the smoke curl into the dark, and let it go. All of it. Finally.